Hi, everybody, and welcome to our session, AI Didn't Write This Story, How Researchers Use AI to Unlock Human Truths in Real Research. I'm Quirk's editor, Joe Ridholm, and before we get started, I just wanted to quickly go over the ways you can participate in today's discussion. You can use the chat tab to interact with other attendees today during the session, and you can use the Q&A tab to submit questions for the presenter during the session, and we'll answer as many questions as we have time for during the Q&A portion at the end. Our session today is presented by NIT. Alexis, take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for spending some time with me today. As mentioned, my name is Alexis White, and I'm a research lead at NIT. Today, I'll be talking about how professional insights teams like me are actually using AI in real workflows to unlock human truths. Not hypothetical use cases, not future promises, but what this looks like in practice. And I want to be very clear from the start. This is not a story about how AI is replacing researchers. It's a story about how AI removes friction from the research process so that researchers like me can spend more time doing what we uniquely do best. So, thinking, interpreting, and telling meaningful stories. To ground us, I'll start with a quick overview of NIT and how we think about AI in research. For those of you who may be newer to NIT, here's the high-level picture. NIT is designed to be the simplest way to go from survey to story in days, not weeks. We combine the power of speed and power of AI with strategic guidance of expert researchers like me end to end. This includes AI-assisted survey creations, automated analysis across quant and qual data, and dynamic editable reporting, all in one platform. The goal for us isn't just speed. It's removing the manual work without sacrificing rigor, depth, nor trust. And an important part of that promise is the role that humans like myself play in this process. So let's talk about that next. NIT is built on the idea that AI should support researchers, not replace them. Expert researchers guide and refine the work at every stage, really ensuring that the insights are grounded in business context and real human understanding. You get the benefit of a full service research experience, but with self-service, speed, cost efficiency, and most importantly, control over the experimental design. AI is really great because it handles a lot of the repetition and the scale, where researchers like me can handle the judgment, the nuances, and the storytelling of the data. So what exactly does that mean across a real end-to-end workflow? At NIT, we support the research lifecycle from survey creation to fielding and QA to analysis and reporting. The AI, it helps us draft and refine our questionnaires, it monitors data quality, it analyzes our open ends, and it helps us cluster themes and summarize our survey respondents. What this does is it dramatically reduces the time researchers spend on mechanical tasks, which frees us up to focus on interpretations and, most importantly, implications. One of the most powerful places this shows up is when quant and qual live together in the same study. NIT brings together quant and qualitative data into a single study and a single data set. Quant, as you guys know, it really helps us understand what's happening at scale, where qual gives us the language, the emotions, and the motivation behind those behaviors. Because when those two data sets live together from the start, we're no longer stitching together insights together after the fact. We're building a cohesive story from the beginning. And when you show people AI can do all of that, it usually triggers the same question. If AI can analyze the data, what's left for the researcher? This is the question that everyone is asking, including myself sometimes. If AI can write surveys, if it can analyze data, if it can summarize themes, what's left for us to do? Quite frankly, it's a fair question, and answering that is really at the heart of today's conversation. To answer it, we do have to be clear about the differences between output and insight. As we know, AI is very good at generating output, whether it's summaries, whether it's charts, whether it's dashboards, you name it. But insight is a little something different. Insight requires judgment. It requires context. It really requires deciding what matters and why it matters. And that's where human researchers like us are still essential, and where AI is actually most powerful as a supporting tool. This is exactly where the industry gets stuck. So let's clear up this myth of, myths versus reality. The myth is that AI is the author of insights, that full automation leads to faster and better decisions. The reality, as a lot of us are learning, is that faster output doesn't automatically equal better insight. What AI is actually very good at is scale. As you guys know, it can scan massive data sets. It can identify patterns, it can cluster themes, it can really surface some of those signals that we can't actually do at a reasonable scale by ourselves. But what it can't do is decide what matters. It doesn't understand business context. It doesn't understand which tensions are strategically meaningful for us. And honestly, that's where we come in. As a researcher myself, one of the mental models that I find most helpful is that AI, it's a story finder, but we're storytellers. The AI is really good at surfacing those signals across data, but what we do is really help shape those signals into meaningful judgment and narrative. And to make this real, I want to walk you through a project where I use AI throughout the entire process and show you exactly where it helped and where my judgment mattered the most. So the project I want to talk about today focus on everyday pantry and fridge staples. The core question of this research sounds pretty simple. What actually earns a permanent place in someone's pantry and fridge? But underneath that, there's a lot of complexity. There's budget pressures, there's health priorities, there's convenience, and then there are just general household needs that underlie that research. And quite frankly, this is exactly the kind of question where AI can help us at scale while we, the researchers, can focus on interpretation and meaning. So first, here's how we designed the study to capture both the breadth and depth we needed to address this research question. For this study, we surveyed 307 shoppers aged 25 to 65. All of our respondents were primary or shared grocery store decision makers who shopped at least twice a month, either online or in store. We were very intentional about including a mix of household types with different types of health mindsets. We also included a subset of 155 video respondents where shoppers actually walked us through what's in their pantries and what's in their fridges and explained why these items were there, what was some of the drivers behind purchasing. This combination where we structured quantitative data with actual real world explanations is where AI becomes especially powerful. With that data set in place, the first thing we really needed to understand was how shoppers define a staple. Before we get into the findings, I do want to pause for a moment because this slide, it represents something really important about how AI is being used here. What you're seeing automating on the screen is the AI generated research deck that the KNIT platform created once the data started coming in. This is not a final deliverable. This was not shared with our clients. This was not shared on our website. And it's not meant to replace the research thinking that goes into a complete deliverable. Instead, what you're seeing on the screen, it's a starting structure. KNIT's AI took the quant and qualitative data and organized it into a draft narrative. It helped surface some of the potential insights areas, some of the early qualitative themes, and actually suggested a story flow. And this is really where that efficiency game shows up. Instead of staring at a blank slide or spending days just organizing the outputs and my thoughts, as I'm sure all of you have spent doing, I was actually able to react to something that already has taken shape. As a researcher, my role here is to interrogate. Here, as I'm going through this deck, I'm poking holes in the output. I ask questions like, does this theme actually matter? What needs more evidence? And what's the noise that I'm seeing in this data? For me, AI isn't telling me what the story is. It's helping me see where a story might exist, but a little bit faster. So I can actually spend my time refining, validating, and pressure testing some of my hypotheses. With that draft structure in place, the first place I wanted to dig into, especially with regards to this research objective, is into how shoppers actually define a staple. Because at the end of the day, that definition underpins everything else in this story. So what you're seeing on the screen is actually the initial AI output. So here we're able to see how the AI analyzed the open-ended respondents and how people actually defined a pantry or fridge staple. The findings at surface kind of show us pretty accurate data. We start to see that staples are everyday foods that support multiple meals, things like milk, meat, pasta, and bread. Across all the household types, we do see that staples function as more of a dependable default, especially those pantry items. In other words, essential is defined as by being consistent, by being readily available, not necessarily exciting or novel. But using the context of these qualitative themes, I really wanted to understand, okay, if this is important to folks, where do finances come into the equation? Do consumers actually feel financial pressure? And if so, where do they flex and where do they hold firm? Here, I example when and why shoppers switch brands to save money. The AI, it actually surfaced that discretionary spenders show a great brand stickiness other than some of the other cohorts we looked into this study. And importantly, trade-off triggers are largely consistent across household types. What this tells us is that shoppers are managing price without disrupting their routines. That tension that we see, it actually shows up more quickly when we look at consumer perceptions on private label branding. The research and the AI in this case surfaced a clear split in private label perceptions. About half of the shoppers that we interviewed said that they trusted private labels and view many products as equal in quality to national brands. The other remainder of the respondents we interviewed, they actually expressed a little criticism. They said that a lot of it was driven by brand loyalty or concerns about quality in certain categories. This insight that we're seeing, it's not necessarily private label is winning or the extreme private label is losing. It's that credibility has been earned, but emotional and functional barriers still matter. So at this point, the AI has surfaced a key signal. But next, I want to show you how to use this platform to dig into what those patterns actually mean. So to dig a little bit deeper, I then went and looked at our AI generated insight summaries associated with this general theme. And this is where the AI is most helpful early on. It's not going to give me a definitive final answer that I can then create a recommendation for, but it's giving me a directional tool. So the summary that I'm viewing on the screen and through our AI analysis pointed to versatility, convenience, breakfast routines, and kid appeal as reoccurring drivers when it comes to staples. That gave me a really fast starting hypothesis, but not the full story. So instead of just stopping there with my research, cleaning up the deck and submitting it, I actually used this summary as a prompt to go a little bit deeper. So in the first place I wanted to go deeper was really into some of the more underlying themes, especially what does versatility actually mean to consumers? So to do this, I looked at our insight summary and actually dug a little bit deeper into the rationale that AI provided alongside the slide. Based off of this summary, it actually pointed to a few specific drivers. Number one, products that stretch beyond a single meal, breakfast items that show up again later on in the day, and convenience and ease of preparation. Again, they gave me direction, but not necessarily depth. So from there, my goal was to unpack what do those themes and trends actually mean in reality, especially with regards to versatility. So digging a little bit deeper into the sub themes of some of our questions and looking at what the AI generated, it pointed to something a little bit clearer. Versatility didn't necessarily mean just being flexible. For consumers, versatility is all about those mental shortcuts. These are the products that people don't have to really think about because they already know how they fit into their day. But the best way for me as a researcher to validate those interpretations is to ground it in people's own words. I really wanted to hear from the consumer. How are we defining this theme? So what I did, I dug into the actual videos that we captured for the study via the pantry walkthroughs. So, in watching those videos, I was able to see a lot of cool things. I got to hear from people and see people point to items in their fridge and their pantries. I got to hear them explain why they're, always there, really making those insights real. I was no longer relying on quantitative data or just text open ends. I was seeing with my own eyes. And in watching those videos, I heard things like, I can use this for breakfast or dinner. My kids will always eat this. And this is something that I can throw together quickly. And that's where that pattern, that quantitative data, that's when it becomes human truth. AI was really good at helping surfacing those initial patterns, but a lot of the meaning, a lot of the context, and the judgment from actual consumers really came from those videos. And once I was able to ground those patterns in real human truth, the final step was shaping it into a story that's not only clear, but most importantly, actionable. I think the first clear takeaway from this study is that staples are defined by routine reliability, not just brand or novelty. These are everyday foods that people depend on to get through multiple meals across the day. They're kept on hand because they're familiar, they're flexible, they reduce the friction in a consumer's day to day life, not just because they're the most exciting. The second finding that we found from this study is about how shoppers manage price without disrupting their routines. We saw that brand loyalty is strongest in beverages, while pantry categories like snacks, spreads, pastas, and proteins, they allow for a little bit more flexibility for consumers. And what's important is how flexibility shows up for people. We see that people switch brands, they switch formats, they switch pack sizes only when they believe the quality trade off is minimal. In other words, in layman's terms, shoppers protect their habits first and they optimize per price second when it comes to staples. And the third key finding is really around the private label argument. As I mentioned earlier, about half of the shoppers really trust private label staples and see them as an equal in quality to national brands, especially amongst those more budget conscious households. But there's a lot of skepticism that still exists, and a lot of it is driven by the broad attachment and perceived risk in certain categories. The big point that I want to underscore is that none of this insight came from AI alone. AI helped me move faster through the data. It helped me move faster in drafting a questionnaire. It helped me get out of field quicker. It even helped me identify certain patterns and organize some of the information. But the meaning, the so what, and most importantly, why this matters really came from me connecting those patterns to real human behavior and most importantly, business decisions. And that brings us back to where we started. AI didn't write the story, researchers like me did, but with better tools. The real opportunity for researchers in 2026, especially with AI, is that it isn't automation on its own. It's there to help us remove friction from the research process so that insights teams can spend more time interpreting, storytelling, and most importantly, driving impact. If you want to hear more about KNIT, whether it's a deeper demo, maybe talk about some of our use cases, or just a conversation about how do you add AI into your workflow, we'd love to connect. My colleague Cece, she's going to go ahead and drop some resources about KNIT, as well as my LinkedIn. And if you want to access the deck, please reach out to her. I want to just say thank you so much for your time today. And I really look forward to addressing some of the questions before we break into the next section.
All right. Thank you so much, Alexis.
Thank you.
Got a question here. One that was posed by the audience. Yeah, I think just generally asking about how do you decide when to trust the AI's analysis versus, to kind of dig deeper yourself? There was a question just asking about how do you know if maybe the AI has missed something and, that you have to kind of go and search for yourself. So I guess kind of just looking at that, like knowing when to dig deeper.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the front end. I think as a researcher and as anyone who's worked in data, like your AI and just your outputs in general are only as good as the context that you upload in the front end of the research process. So when I'm working with AI, my first goal is to make sure I'm writing clear research objectives and clear business context so that my actual output reflects the expertise that I'm building. I think the beauty of AI is that it allows me to focus my energy on like what's surfacing. But my core job is really to like spot check the AI. So I always say something doesn't pass the sniff test. I'm going to go to a couple of those videos. I'm going to like actually read through the transcripts, see how people react in real time to those videos to either like prove or disprove or dig a little bit deeper into the initial AI output. Additionally, I'm always one to look at the quantitative data. As we know, quant data isn't going anywhere. So I actually build in like key checks within like my questionnaire and within my reporting flow just to ensure that I'm seeing directional data that makes sense and that what I've seen in the greater business context. So all in all, like there's no perfect way, but I think as researchers, we have to use our own business and research context to make sure that things are passing the sniff test and they can actually be applied to real world problems.
Sure. Question back to this, the example that you cited. They're asking about, does AI help you get to the latent emotional drivers for choosing staples? In the
So yes and no. I think AI is good at pulling out key themes for how people answer questions. But I think as my job as a researcher is actually digging into those themes for accuracy, ensuring that, it's applicable to the different subgroups, looking for differences and patterns amongst different groups to help me feel informed and confident at what I'm putting in my final deliverable. So I think to summarize, AI is going to be a starting place, but I'm actually going to take it from, here's a data point that AI spit out to here's an insight that I feel confident about.
Sure. Question here too, just asking about AI's ability to understand the nuances of emotions that qualitative kind of gives you. And they say their experience has been that AI misunderstands a lot of nuances. What are your thoughts on that? Or can you give some examples where you feel like it did pick up on the nuances?
Oh, yes. So I think as someone who's been working in like this AI quant space for the last couple of years, I feel like I've seen earlier on where like AI is horrible at picking up sarcasm, which is something I'm personally known for. But I will say, as we continue to train these models, as we continue to like redirect the AI like qualitative outputs, I do believe it's getting smarter. One perfect example of that is that within the knit platform, we get the initial AI themes, but I actually go in and watch the videos associated with that. And I have the ability to retag the themes. Not only does that provide a more accurate picture overall for what the data is saying, but it also allows me to train the AI to pick up some of those subtle things it missed and get smarter as we continue to use it more in our workflow.
Sure. For teams, that aren't used to running qual and quant separately, can you talk about what the learning curve has maybe been like for some of the clients and to start thinking about them as kind of one integrated study?
It's funny. It's actually more of an unlearning curve. I actually feel like most researchers, and including myself earlier on, we were trained to think as qual and quant as just separate methodologies, separate timelines, budgets, and reports. I think that mindset shift, whether it's for customers or even researchers, is realizing that you don't have to choose. You don't have to, start with qual to explore and quant to validate. You're actually being able to do those simultaneously with the same respondents and by them answering the same research questions from different angles. I think like that practical learning curves pretty much like lives with the platform that you're using, but it's actually pretty quick to get comfortable. A lot of the tools, especially like knit, we're creating something that's easy to use that anyone can pick up on. But I think for us, it's more of a strategic shift onto how you design research. And quite frankly, that's just going to take a couple of research projects for it to click. But once it's done, like you really cannot go back to looking at quant and qual separately.
Sure. You kind of touched on this in the outset, just about, AI replacing researchers, but there's a question here just about, so what does the researcher actually do during the analysis phase if AI is doing all the heavy lifting?
Oh man, my favorite question. I'm going to be honest, like AI, like it just takes away a lot of the tedious work. Like I miss not being able to have to transcribe every single video. I miss not being able to like having to code the open ends. Like it takes me back to being an intern. But I think what it really does help with is identifying like those just general themes and patterns. And I'll even say it helps you generate the initial charts. Again, those are things that used to take me days, and now they're being done like in a split second. But I think for a researcher, it really allows me to kind of just jump straight into the most interesting part of research. And that's really defining like, what does the data mean? How do I apply this data? So, like, from a research standpoint, I'm not spending days coding, but now I'm actually jumping into reviewing the themes that the AI has identified. And I'm asking myself, does this make sense? Is it meaningful? Is it just noise? I'm able to dig into a couple of clips versus hundreds of thousands to really understand the emotion behind the data. And then I'm actually able to connect those patterns. So, like, I'm spending less time building and more time determining the so what behind the data. And does my customer or brand actually need this information?
Sure.
I think for researchers who are still a little skeptical, it's important to think about AI as being more of a research assistant, but not necessarily a researcher.
Totally. Well, I think we've gotten everybody's questions here. So thank you, everybody out there, for the great input. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Alexis, and thanks to Nit also for the great content. But enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.